The gunshots echoed through the parking lot like thunder. 15-year-old Ethan didn't think. He just moved. 3 bullets meant for 6-year-old Sophie found him instead. As the biker kid hit the ground, her father, Marcus, watched the homeless boy who'd been sleeping behind their clubhouse collapse in a spreading pool of red. In that split second, everything Marcus thought he knew about worth, family, and brotherhood shattered. What happened in the next 72 hours would expose a truth so devastating it would bring an entire town to its knees. But first, someone had to survive the night. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Enjoy the story. Most people never noticed Ethan at all. That's exactly how he wanted it. For 3 months, the 15-year-old had lived in the narrow space between the dumpster and the chain-link fence behind the Steel Riders Motorcycle Club's headquarters in Millbrook. It wasn't much, just enough room to lay out flattened cardboard boxes with a tarp overhead when it rained. But it was hidden, safe, and that's all that mattered when you were a kid trying to survive on the streets alone. Ethan had a rule that had kept him alive. Never be seen, never be remembered, never be a problem. He moved like a ghost through his days. Before sunrise, he'd roll up his cardboard, stuff his belongings into a torn backpack, and disappear. He'd spend mornings collecting aluminum cans, keeping his head down, staying invisible. By noon, he'd cash in his haul at the scrapyard, usually enough for a gas station sandwich and a bottle of water. The afternoons were for watching. He'd return to his spot behind the clubhouse, slipping through a gap in the fence nobody else seemed to know about. From there, hidden behind the dumpster, he could see almost everything that happened in the Steel Riders parking lot. He watched the bikers come and go, big men with scarred knuckles and leather vests covered in patches. Men who moved with the kind of confidence that came from knowing they were dangerous. But he also noticed something else. How they looked out for each other. How they'd stop and talk, clap each other on the shoulders, laugh at jokes he couldn't hear. It was the kind of brotherhood Ethan had never known. The kind that made something inside his chest ache in a way he didn't have words for. But more than anything else, he watched the little girl. Every afternoon around 4, a massive biker with a gray beard and a leather vest marked with VP pulled up on a midnight blue Harley. The man's name was Marcus. Ethan had heard the others call him that. And within minutes, a small figure would come running out of the clubhouse door. 6 years old, dark pigtails bouncing, pink backpack nearly as big as she was. She'd run straight to Marcus with her arms spread wide, and he'd scoop her up like she weighed nothing at all, spinning her around while she shrieked with laughter. Her name was Sophie. Ethan watched the way Marcus's whole face changed when he looked at his daughter. The hard edges softened. The dangerous man became just a father, listening intently as Sophie chattered about her day at school, carefully securing her helmet before his own. It was the kind of love Ethan recognized because he'd seen it once. A long time ago, in memories that felt more like dreams now. The bikers had no idea Ethan had been watching them. They especially didn't know he'd been watching the silver sedan that had been circling their block for the past 5 days. Always at the same time, always slowing down when Sophie came outside. Ethan didn't know what it meant, but he knew predators when he saw them. He'd learned that lesson in foster homes where smiling faces at the dinner table turned into monsters after dark. And he knew with a certainty that lived in his bones that whoever was driving that silver sedan wasn't just driving by, they were hunting. If you believe that every life has value, even the ones society forgets, drop a comment saying Ethan deserved better, because what comes next will test everything you believe about second chances. Marcus Bennett had buried his wife 2 years ago on a Tuesday morning in October. Sophie had been 4 years old, standing beside him in a black dress that was too big, holding on to his hand like it was the only solid thing left in the world. Cancer had taken Jennifer in 6 brutal months, and when she died, she'd made Marcus promise one thing: keep their daughter safe, keep her happy, keep her whole. He'd kept that promise every single day since. Being the vice president of the Steel Riders Motorcycle Club meant Marcus had responsibilities. The club came first. That was the code they all lived by. But Sophie came before the code. She came before everything. He'd restructured his entire life around her. Mornings were for getting her ready for school, braiding her hair even though his rough hands fumbled with the small elastics, packing her lunch in the pink lunchbox with the unicorns on it. The Steel Riders clubhouse had become as much Sophie's home as his. The brothers had watched her grow up within these walls. They'd taught her to play poker with candy instead of chips. They'd let her draw on their arms with washable markers. And Marcus trusted every single one of them with her life. That trust extended to the world outside, too. Maybe more than it should have. The Steel Riders MC had respect in Millbrook. Nobody messed with the club. Nobody was stupid enough to try. That reputation was armor, and Marcus had worn it so long he'd forgotten it could be pierced. On the afternoon of August 17th, Marcus pulled into the clubhouse lot on his Harley at his usual time. 3 other bikes were parked near the entrance. Inside, he could hear the low rumble of voices. Someone laughing, the crack of pool balls connecting. Normal, safe, home. He'd just killed the engine when he noticed the silver sedan parked across the street. Something about the way the car sat there, engine running, windows tinted dark, made the hair on the back of Marcus's neck stand up. He'd spent 2 tours in Afghanistan before coming home and patching into the club. He'd learned to trust his instincts about threats. He watched the sedan for a moment. It didn't move. Nobody got out. Marcus shook his head, dismissing it. Probably just someone waiting for a passenger. He was getting paranoid. The clubhouse door opened and Sophie came running out. Her backpack bounced against her small frame, her pigtails flying behind her. Her face lit up the way it always did when she saw him. "Daddy!" she called, her voice carrying across the parking lot. Marcus smiled, opening his arms to catch her. She was his whole world, his reason for breathing. Behind the dumpster at the back of the lot, Ethan's body went rigid. The silver sedan's door was opening. Nobody knew why the sedan came that day. Not yet. But in 72 hours, they'd discover the hit wasn't random. It was personal, and it was connected to a woman the Steel Riders MC thought they'd left in the past. Ethan saw the gun before anyone else did. The man stepping out of the silver sedan moved with purpose, his hand already reaching inside his jacket. Ethan had seen enough violence in his 15 years to recognize the motion. He knew what came next. He knew what a gun looked like when it cleared a waistband, and he knew with absolute clarity exactly where that barrel was pointing, at Sophie. The little girl was running across the parking lot, her pink backpack bouncing, her small voice calling out for her daddy. She had no idea. Nobody did. Marcus was turning toward her, arms opening for a hug, his back to the street. The afternoon sun was bright and warm, and a man with a gun was taking aim at a 6-year-old child. Ethan's body moved before his brain caught up. He launched himself from behind the dumpster, his worn sneakers pounding against asphalt. 3 months of staying invisible evaporated in an instant. He didn't think about the risk, didn't calculate the odds. He just ran. The first shot cracked through the air like a whip. The bullet hit Ethan's right shoulder, spinning him sideways. The impact felt like being hit with a sledgehammer, wrapped in fire. His body twisted, but momentum kept him moving forward. Kept him between the gunman and Sophie. He heard her scream. Heard Marcus roar something that might have been a name or might have been rage given voice. The second shot came before Ethan hit the ground. This one punched into his left side just below his ribs. The pain was different this time. Deeper, sharper, stealing his breath. He felt his legs give out, felt the asphalt rushing up to meet him. But even falling, he kept his body angled between the shooter and the little girl. The third bullet grazed his skull as he collapsed. It carved a burning line across his temple, and suddenly the world was red and blurry and far away. He heard more screaming, heard the squeal of tires, heard boots pounding across pavement. His cheek pressed against the hot asphalt, and he could see Sophie's pink sneakers just a few feet away. She was still standing, still whole, still alive. He'd done it. Whatever happened next, he'd done it. The parking lot erupted into chaos. Bikers poured out of the clubhouse. Marcus reached Sophie first, his hands running over her frantically, checking for wounds, for blood. She was hysterical but untouched. Not a scratch on her. Then Marcus saw Ethan. The boy was lying in a spreading pool of blood, his body twisted at an unnatural angle, his eyes half open but unfocused. 3 wounds. Right shoulder torn open, left side leaking red, head bleeding from a furrow that had missed his skull by less than an inch. He was 15 years old and dying on the asphalt, and Marcus had never seen him before in his life. As Marcus knelt beside the dying boy, holding pressure on wounds that were bleeding faster than he could stop, one thought cut through the panic. This kid just died for my daughter, and I don't even know his name. As Ethan's heart stopped twice before they got him to County General, the EMTs found something in his pocket that would change everything. A photograph, faded and creased, with a face Marcus recognized. Someone who was supposed to be dead. County General's emergency room had seen its share of trauma, but even the veteran nurses paused when the paramedics wheeled Ethan through the doors. 3 gunshot wounds, massive blood loss, 15 years old. Marcus sat in a plastic chair in the waiting room with Sophie curled in his lap, her face buried against his chest. She hadn't stopped shaking since the shooting. His own hands were still covered in blood. The boy's blood. A stranger's blood. Blood that had been spilled to save his daughter's life. "Is the boy going to die, Daddy?" Sophie whispered against his shirt. Marcus's throat closed up. He didn't know how to answer that. The paramedics hadn't made any promises. "I don't know, sweetheart," Marcus finally said, his voice rough. "But the doctors are doing everything they can." The other club members stood in a loose circle around Marcus's chair. Bull, the club's sergeant-at-arms, was on his phone trying to get information. The club had a code that went deeper than patches and bylaws. You didn't abandon someone who saved your family. The police arrived within 20 minutes. Detective Sarah Mitchell was a 15-year veteran of Millbrook PD. She approached Marcus carefully, her badge visible, her posture non-threatening. "Mr. Bennett, I need to ask you some questions about what happened." Marcus looked up at her. Exhaustion and adrenaline warring in his system. "Some psychopath tried to kill my daughter. A kid I've never seen before saved her life. That's what happened." Mitchell pulled out a small notepad. "The silver sedan, had you noticed it before today?" "No." The word came out harder than Marcus intended. "Wait, maybe. I don't know. There was a car parked across the street. I saw it, but I didn't think—" His voice cracked. "Do you have enemies, Mr. Bennett? Anyone who might want to hurt you or your daughter?" Marcus shook his head. "Nobody who'd go after a kid." Bull interrupted, walking over from where he'd been talking to the hospital staff. "The kid had something in his pocket. The EMTs logged it with his personal effects." Mitchell's eyes sharpened. "What kind of something?" "A photograph." 10 minutes later, Mitchell returned from the evidence locker with a clear plastic bag. Inside was a photograph, worn and faded from years of handling. The edges were torn. The crease marks suggested it had been folded and unfolded countless times. When Detective Mitchell showed Marcus the photograph, the room went dead silent. Because the woman in the photo was Catherine Hayes, Marcus's first love. The woman who'd left him 16 years ago with nothing but a note and a broken heart. The woman who died in a car accident when her son was barely 2 years old. Except now, looking at that photograph, Marcus was doing math that didn't add up. If Catherine's son was 2 when she died, that would make him 15 now, the same age as the boy bleeding out in the ICU. The photograph showed a young Catherine, maybe 22 years old, standing in front of a park. She was holding a baby, maybe 6 months old, cradling him against her chest. On the back of the photograph, in Catherine's handwriting that Marcus would recognize anywhere, were 3 words. "Ethan, my everything." Hours passed. The surgery stretched from 2 hours to 4 to 6. But Marcus didn't move. He sat there with his daughter in his lap, and a ghost from his past burning a hole in his mind. While Ethan was still in surgery, Detective Mitchell pulled Marcus into the hallway. Her face was grave. "We ran his prints through foster care records," she said. "His full name is Ethan Hayes. According to these records, his mother died 14 years ago." She paused, watching Marcus's face. "Ring any bells?" Marcus felt the floor tilt beneath him. Catherine, Ethan, 15 years old. The math was impossible to ignore now. The timing lined up perfectly with when Catherine had disappeared from his life, when she left with nothing but a note saying she couldn't do this anymore. She'd been pregnant, she'd had his son, and she'd never told him. Suddenly, everything made sense, and nothing made sense. The way Ethan had been watching the clubhouse for months, the photograph he'd kept like a lifeline. But if Ethan was Catherine's son, if there was even a chance he was Marcus's son, then who was trying to kill Sophie? And why? If you believe children deserve the truth about their parents, comment "Every child deserves to know." Because the web of lies surrounding Ethan is about to get a lot more twisted. The surgery ended just after midnight. The surgeon came out with blood on her scrubs and exhaustion written across her face. "He survived. Barely," she said. "The bullet to his shoulder shattered bone. The one to his side nicked his liver. The graze to his skull caused a concussion and significant bleeding. He'll need months of recovery, but he's alive." Marcus sat in his home office in the early hours of the morning, Sophie finally asleep in her own bed, and pulled out boxes he hadn't opened in over a decade. The club kept meticulous records, and somewhere in these files was the truth about Catherine's last days with him. He found his old journal first. He flipped through entries about runs, about club politics, and then he found it. The entry from 16 years ago, dated April 12th. "Catherine told me today, said she's pregnant, said she's scared, said she needs time to think." Marcus stared at those words, his heart hammering against his ribs. He remembered that day with crystalline clarity now. They'd been sitting in his truck outside her apartment. She'd been crying, her hands shaking, telling him she didn't know if she could bring a baby into this world, into his world. The club life wasn't safe for kids, she'd said. He'd promised her they'd figure it out, promised he'd protect both of them always. 3 weeks later, she'd left the note. Marcus found it in another box, still in its original envelope. "I can't do this life. I'm sorry." That was it. 8 words and she was gone. But the club records told a different story. Catherine's car had been around town for nearly 2 years after she'd left Marcus. Different apartment, different job, but she'd never really left Millbrook. She'd just left him. The accident report came next. Marcus's hands trembled as he read it. Catherine's car had gone off Hamilton Bridge on a rainy November night 14 years ago. The vehicle had plunged into the river below. Her body had been recovered 3 days later. The police investigation concluded it was an accident. Poor visibility, wet roads, a single vehicle collision with the guardrail that sent her over the edge. Child Protective Services records showed that Ethan Hayes, age 2, had been placed into emergency foster care the day after his mother's body was found. Catherine was listed as the only parent. The father's name on Ethan's birth certificate was blank, just a dash where a name should have been. Ethan became a ward of the state, shuffled into a system that would define the next 13 years of his life. The math was simple. The truth was impossible. Ethan might be his son. Marcus's phone rang at 4 in the morning. It was the hospital. "Mr. Bennett, you asked us to call if there were any changes. Ethan's condition destabilized about 20 minutes ago. His heart stopped. The code team was able to revive him, but he regained consciousness briefly." "Did he say anything?" Marcus asked, already grabbing his keys. There was a pause. "The attending nurse wrote it down. He only said 3 words before losing consciousness again. He found us." While Marcus was putting pieces together, Ethan had flatlined. When they got him back, he whispered 3 words that would crack the case wide open. "He found us." By the time Marcus reached County General, the sun was starting to rise over Millbrook. Detective Mitchell was already there, standing outside the ICU with a file folder under her arm and an expression that told Marcus everything was about to change. "I pulled everything from CPS," Mitchell said quietly, handing him the file. "You need to see what this kid survived." Marcus opened the file. The first page was an intake form dated 14 years ago. Subject: Ethan Hayes, male, age 2 years, 4 months. Reason for placement: mother deceased, no identifiable father, no living relatives willing to assume custody. Below that was a photograph. A little boy with dark hair and wide, confused eyes, staring at a camera held by a stranger. He was holding a stuffed rabbit, gripping it like it was the only solid thing left in his world. Marcus flipped through page after page. 7 foster homes in 13 years. 7 times Ethan had been told this was his new family, his new chance. 7 times he'd been proven wrong. The reports became repetitive. Ethan shows signs of attachment disorder. Ethan refuses to engage with family activities. Ethan is withdrawn and uncommunicative. a child protecting himself the only way he knew how, by not letting anyone close enough to hurt him. Ethan had run away from his sixth foster home 4 times before he turned 12. The final incident happened 3 days after his 12th birthday. He disappeared for a week, and when police found him, he was 40 miles away, sleeping in a bus station with that same worn photograph clutched in his hand. According to his last social worker, Patricia Reynolds, Ethan had asked the same questions for years. Who was my dad? Why didn't he want me? Was he in the motorcycle club? Patricia's notes from 2 years ago painted a picture of a boy on a mission. Ethan had started researching his mother's death. He'd found old newspaper articles about the accident at the library, and he'd found one article that mentioned Catherine had been connected to local motorcycle culture. That photograph Ethan carried, the one showing Catherine with baby Ethan, had become more than a memento. It had become a clue. In the background of the photo, barely visible, was part of a sign, Steel Riders Clubhouse. Patricia's final case notes, dated 6 months before the shooting, included a troubling observation: attempted home visit at Ethan's last known location. Subject not present, but witnessed unidentified male in silver sedan parked across street. Male appeared to be surveilling the area. Recommend increased monitoring for Ethan's safety. The silver sedan, the same one circling the Steel Riders Clubhouse, the same one that opened fire on Sophie. There's more, Mitchell said. The traffic cameras caught the sedan at 3 intersections. We got a partial plate and tracked it to a registered owner, Thomas Hayes, age 52. Marcus's blood ran cold. Hayes? As in Catherine Hayes? Mitchell nodded grimly. Thomas Hayes was Catherine's uncle. He raised her after her parents died when she was 9 years old. And according to the background we pulled, he's former military, 20 years in the Army, trained in firearms and tactical operations. Marcus felt the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. Catherine had mentioned an uncle once or twice, usually when explaining why she had to check in. Thomas had rules. He was protective, maybe too protective. We interviewed Catherine's former co-workers, Mitchell continued. Thomas used to come by the diner where she worked. He'd sit in the corner and watch her. One waitress remembered him confronting you in the parking lot once, warning you to stay away from his niece. Marcus had no memory of this, but it must have been early on, before things got serious. We pulled Thomas's psychiatric records from his VA file, Mitchell said. During a mandatory evaluation 3 years ago, Thomas admitted something chilling. I couldn't let Catherine's bastard son find the biker trash who destroyed her life. I couldn't let him poison another generation. The realization hit Marcus like a physical blow. Thomas had killed Catherine, his own niece, to protect her from the life she'd chosen, and now he was trying to kill both of Marcus's children, the son he'd never known about and the daughter he'd raised. If you can't stand people who hurt kids just to settle old scores, comment protect the innocent, because the person hunting Ethan and Sophie isn't done yet. Mitchell issued an APB for Thomas Hayes. Hospital security was notified. The Steel Riders MC posted guards outside Ethan's room in rotating shifts. Sophie was moved to a safe house with 3 brothers standing watch. But Thomas was military trained. He knew how to evade surveillance. At 2:18 in the morning, hospital security spotted a man in the parking garage matching Thomas's description. By the time they reached the ICU floor, he was gone. But he'd left something behind. A message scrawled on the whiteboard outside Ethan's room. The boy dies, then the girl, then you. Thomas Hayes wasn't finished, and now everyone knew he was coming back. Marcus requested the DNA test within 24 hours of learning Ethan's full identity. Detective Mitchell facilitated it through the hospital, taking samples from both Marcus and the unconscious teenager in the ICU. 48 hours felt like 48 years. Marcus sat with the possibility living in his chest like a living thing. The timing aligned perfectly, but timing wasn't certainty. DNA was certainty. Part of him desperately wanted Ethan to be his son, wanted to reclaim those 16 years that had been stolen. But another part of him was terrified. He'd failed this kid for 15 years. How did you come back from that? Sophie didn't have those complicated feelings. She knew the simple truth. The brave boy had saved her life, and that made him a hero. She spent hours at Marcus's kitchen table drawing pictures for Ethan, crayon drawings of a boy with angel wings, a family scene with her, Marcus, and a tall teenage boy all standing in front of a house. "When can I meet him, Daddy?" she asked every day. "When can I say thank you?" "Soon, sweetheart," Marcus would answer, praying it was true. The club had already made their decision. Biology didn't matter to them. "That kid took bullets for Sophie," Bull had said, standing outside the ICU with his arms crossed. "That makes him family. I don't care what any test says. He's ours now." The call came on a Thursday afternoon. Marcus was at the hospital sitting in the ICU waiting room with Bull and two other brothers when his phone rang. "Mr. Bennett, this is Dr. Chen from the hospital lab. I have the results of the paternity test you requested." Marcus's mouth went dry. "Mr. Bennett, the DNA test shows a 99.97% probability of paternity. Ethan Hayes is your biological son." Marcus sat down hard on a bench in the hallway and felt 16 years of grief and rage and loss crystallize into one simple truth. He had a son. He'd always had a son. The tears came without permission. Marcus Bennett, vice president of the Steel Riders MC, combat veteran, sat alone in a hospital corridor and wept. But Ethan was alive. Against every odd, despite 3 bullets and 14 years in hell, Ethan was alive. And that meant they had a chance. The fire alarm shattered the pre-dawn silence at 3:47 in the morning. County General's 5th floor erupted in chaos. Emergency lights strobed red and white down the corridors. The alarm shrieked its mechanical warning. In the parking garage 3 levels below, Thomas Hayes pulled the fire alarm station closed and moved toward the service stairwell. He'd watched the hospital's emergency procedures for 48 hours. He knew security would be pulled toward the primary exits. He knew he had a window to reach the 5th floor ICU. He carried 2 handguns, 42 rounds total, more than enough for what needed to be done. He climbed the stairs methodically, his mind focused on the task. Catherine's face floated in his memory. His niece, the girl he'd raised from 9 years old, the girl who'd thrown her life away for biker trash. He'd tried to save her, and when she'd refused to listen, he'd done what needed to be done. He'd ended her suffering before it could get worse. Now he'd finish what he'd started. Bull saw him first. The big sergeant-at-arms had been posted at the end of the hallway. When the fire alarm went off, his instincts screamed trap. And when the stairwell door opened and a man with military bearing and a gun in each hand stepped through, Bull didn't hesitate. "We've got him," Bull's voice carried down the hallway. "Hayes is here." Marcus had Sophie with him. He'd brought her to the hospital against his better judgment, but she'd begged to see the brave boy. Now he grabbed his daughter and ran for the nearest secure room, a supply closet with a lock. "Stay here," he ordered. "Don't open this door for anyone but me. You understand?" Sophie's eyes were wide with terror, but she nodded. Marcus locked the door from the outside and pocketed the key. Then he ran back toward the ICU, toward his son, toward the confrontation that had been building for 16 years. The club formed their defensive perimeter without needing orders. 6 bikers positioned themselves in the hallway outside Ethan's room. They were a wall of muscle and loyalty, and Thomas Hayes would have to go through them to reach the unconscious teenager behind the door. When Thomas rounded the corner to the ICU, he found 6 bikers blocking the hallway. He raised his gun, his face twisted with rage and grief. "That boy destroyed Catherine's life," he said, his voice shaking. "He should never have been born." Marcus stepped forward, moving through the line of bikers to stand in front. He positioned himself directly between Thomas's gun and Ethan's door, his son's door. "That boy is my son," Marcus said, each word deliberate and final. "And you're going to have to kill me to get to him." Thomas's jaw clenched. "You ruined her. You got her pregnant and destroyed every chance she had for a real life. I tried to save her from you. You killed her," Marcus said. The words hung in the air like an accusation and a verdict. "You murdered Catherine, your own niece, because you couldn't control her anymore." "I freed her," Thomas's voice cracked. "I freed her from a life chained to trash like you, and now I'm going to finish it." What happened next took 11 seconds. Thomas fired. The muzzle flash lit up the hallway. Marcus didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't step aside. The bullet hit him in the shoulder, spinning him sideways, but not down. Behind him, his son lay unconscious and defenseless. and Marcus Bennett would die before he let anyone reach that room. The other bikers rushed forward. Bull moved like a freight train. Thomas got off 2 more shots before they reached him. One went wide, the other caught Bull in the side. But the big man kept coming. Bull hit Thomas like a linebacker, driving him back into the wall. The guns clattered to the floor. 2 other brothers pinned Thomas's arms. The veteran fought like a cornered animal, but 3 men were too many. They took him down hard, securing his wrist with zip ties. By the time hospital security arrived, Thomas was in custody. Marcus was bleeding from his shoulder, but still standing. And Ethan, still unconscious in his ICU room, had never known how close death had come for him again. Police flooded the floor. Detective Mitchell arrived within minutes, her face grim but satisfied. Thomas Hayes was in custody, armed assault, attempted murder, and with the new evidence about Catherine's death, they'd be adding homicide charges. The threat was over. Marcus refused treatment until he could check on his son. He pushed past the paramedics and walked into Ethan's room with blood soaking through his shirt. "We got him," Marcus whispered, taking Ethan's hand. "You're safe now. Sophie is safe. He can't hurt you anymore." 6 days after the shooting, Ethan's eyes opened. The first thing he saw was white ceiling tiles, fluorescent lights, the mechanical arm of medical equipment hovering above him. His mouth was dry, his throat raw. Every part of his body hurt, but he was alive. A nurse appeared. "Ethan, can you hear me? You're in the hospital, you're safe." Hospital. The word triggered fragments of memory. Running, gunshots, a little girl. Pain like fire spreading through his body. Then nothing. Ethan tried to speak, but his voice came out as barely a whisper. "The girl, is she?" "She's fine," the nurse assured him. "Not a scratch on her. Thanks to you." The relief that flooded through Ethan was almost physical. She was okay. He'd done it. The door opened again, but this time it wasn't the nurse. It was Marcus. The big biker looked different than Ethan remembered from his months of watching. Tired, older somehow. His arm was in a sling. But when he saw Ethan awake, his whole face transformed with relief and joy and grief all mixed together. "You're awake," Marcus said, his voice rough. He pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down heavily. "Thank God." Ethan stared at him, confused. Why was this man here? Why did he look at Ethan like he mattered? "You saved my daughter," Marcus said. "You took 3 bullets meant for her." His voice cracked. "Brianna would be dead. My little girl would be dead." Sophie. That was her name. "Is she okay?" Ethan asked again, needing to hear it one more time. "She's perfect. Because of you." Marcus leaned forward. "She's been asking about you every single day. Drew you about 50 pictures. Wants to meet you properly." Something in Ethan's chest tightened. Nobody had ever done that before. "There's something else you need to know," Marcus said, his tone shifting. "Your mother, Catherine Hayes. She was someone I loved a long time ago, before you were born. We were together for almost a year." Ethan's heart rate picked up. This man had known his mother? "She left me 16 years ago," Marcus continued. "Never told me why. I didn't know." He stopped, his jaw working. "I didn't know she was pregnant. Didn't know about you. If I had known, everything would have been different." The words hung in the air between them. "You're my dad?" The question came out small, vulnerable, the voice of every abandoned child who'd ever asked why nobody wanted them. Marcus's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't know, but yeah, I'm your dad, and I'm not going anywhere." Ethan had spent 15 years wondering who his father was, spent 3 months watching the Steel Riders clubhouse, sensing some connection he couldn't name. Now, with tubes still in his chest and his body broken from saving a little girl, he had an answer. He looked at Marcus, this big, scarred biker with tears running down his face, and asked the question he'd been afraid to ask his whole life. "Can I stay?" Marcus took his son's hand, his grip warm and solid and real. "You're not going anywhere. You're home." 2 months later, Ethan stood in the physical therapy room at County General, sweat dripping down his face, his right arm shaking as he tried to lift the 5-pound weight one more time. "Come on, one more rep," Marcus coached from beside him. "You've got this." Ethan gritted his teeth and lifted. His arms screamed in protest, but the weight went up. "That's my boy," Marcus said, and the pride in his voice made all the pain worth it. Recovery had been slow and brutal. 3 surgeries, weeks in the hospital, learning to walk without getting dizzy. But Ethan had survived worse. Compared to 15 years of being nobody, physical pain was manageable. His first day at Millbrook High School came in late October. Ethan had never stayed in one school long enough to feel like he belonged. But walking through those doors with a backpack Marcus had bought him and clothes that actually fit felt surreal. Sophie had insisted on coming along, even though the elementary school was in a different building. She'd held Ethan's hand in the parking lot and told him she'd already told all her friends about her brave big brother. "You're going to do great," she'd said with absolute certainty. "And if anyone is mean to you, you tell me and I'll tell Daddy and the uncles will handle it." Ethan had laughed at that. The idea of 6-year-old Sophie sicking a motorcycle club on school bullies. But the protective, fierce love in her voice had made his throat tight. She was his little sister, and she loved him like he'd always been there. The club threw him a delayed 16th birthday party at the clubhouse in November. Ethan had never had a real birthday party before. Just whatever the foster families had grudgingly provided, usually a store-bought cake and an obligation gift card. But the Steel Riders MC went all out. Decorations, a massive cake, presents piled on a table, and every single member of the club showed up to celebrate a kid they'd adopted as one of their own. Bull gave him a leather jacket, not a club vest that had to be earned, but a good jacket that marked him as family. Others gave him tools for working on bikes, books about motorcycle mechanics, and Marcus gave him something that made Ethan's eyes burn with tears he refused to shed in front of everyone. A framed photograph of Catherine, young and smiling, the same image from the worn photo Ethan had carried for years, but restored and printed and beautiful. "She was special," Marcus said quietly as Ethan stared at his mother's face, "and she made you. Don't ever forget that you come from love, even when everything else was hard." The motorcycle lessons started in December. Marcus had an old bike he'd been restoring, and he taught Ethan the basics in the clubhouse parking lot. How to balance, how to shift, how to feel the machine respond to your body. Ethan was a natural, picking it up faster than Marcus had expected. Maybe it was in his blood. Maybe it was just determination. Either way, watching his son learn to ride filled Marcus with a joy he hadn't known he could still feel. Ethan's bedroom in Marcus's house had become a real space. Not temporary, not borrowed. His. The photograph of Catherine hung on the wall in a place of honor. Beside it, Marcus had hung a new photograph, the three of them together, taken at Thanksgiving. Ethan, Marcus, and Sophie. A family that had been forged in violence and blood, but had chosen each other anyway. On Christmas morning, Sophie gave Ethan a present wrapped in paper she decorated herself with markers and glitter. Inside was a hand-drawn picture of a boy with angel wings catching bullets. Under it, in her careful 6-year-old handwriting, "My hero, my brother." Ethan put it on his wall next to his mother's photograph. He had a past now, a history that was painful but real. And finally, he had a future. Thomas Hayes sat in the interrogation room at Millbrook Police Department, his face bruised, his military posture somehow still intact. He'd waived his right to an attorney. He wanted to talk. Wanted someone to understand why he'd done what he'd done. "Catherine was 9 years old when her parents died," Thomas began. "The fire took them both. She had nobody else. I was her mother's younger brother, barely 30 myself. No idea how to raise a little girl, but she was family, so I stepped up." Detective Mitchell listened without interrupting, her recorder capturing every word. "I gave her everything," Thomas continued. "A home, stability, rules. I taught her right from wrong. I kept her safe. She was a good kid, smart, kind. She had a future, college scholarships, a chance to be something better. And then she met him." The way Thomas said him dripped with venom. "Marcus Bennett, biker trash, everything I'd spent years protecting her from. I told her to stay away, but she wouldn't listen." His hands clenched on the table. "When she told me she was pregnant, I gave her a choice. Get rid of the baby and the biker or lose me. She chose him. So I cut her off. But you didn't really cut her off, did you? Mitchell leaned forward. Thomas's jaw tightened. I wanted to make sure she was okay. I watched her struggle, watched her try to raise that baby alone in a tiny apartment, barely making rent. And I knew she was miserable. She'd made the wrong choice and it was destroying her. So you decided to intervene, Mitchell said. I decided to free her. Thomas's voice took on a fervent quality. I followed her that night, November 13th, 14 years ago. She was driving to the Steel Riders clubhouse. She'd called Bennett that afternoon. She was going to tell him about the boy, going to pull him back into that disaster. Mitchell's expression remained neutral. What did you do? I stopped her. Thomas's voice was flat now. I followed her onto Hamilton Bridge. Raining hard that night. Poor visibility. I accelerated and hit her rear bumper hard enough to send her through the guardrail. I watched her car go over, watched it hit the water, and I drove away. The confession hung in the air like poison. I thought I'd saved her, Thomas said quietly. Saved her from a life of poverty and violence. I thought I'd freed her from the consequences of her worst decision. And Ethan? Mitchell asked. What about Catherine's son? Thomas's face hardened. He should have gone into the system and disappeared, but the system failed. I kept track of him through my security contacts, watched him bounce from home to home, and then, 3 months ago, my surveillance showed him sleeping behind the Steel Riders clubhouse. He'd found them. The very thing Catherine had died trying to prevent was about to happen anyway. So you decided to kill him. I decided to finish what should have ended 14 years ago. Thomas's eyes were cold, empty of remorse. I was going to eliminate the boy, but then I saw Bennett had another daughter, a little girl, and I realized, one child for one child. Bennett had taken Catherine from me. I would take both his children from him. Perfect symmetry, perfect justice. When Marcus heard the full confession through Detective Mitchell's briefing, he stood in the hospital hallway with his arm in a sling and his daughter holding his hand. He thought about Catherine, the girl he'd loved, the woman who died protecting their secret. He thought about Ethan, the son who'd saved his daughter without knowing they were family. And he thought about the 14 years stolen from all of them because one man couldn't accept that love doesn't follow rules. Thomas Hayes was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Multiple counts, first-degree murder of Catherine Hayes, attempted murder of Ethan Hayes and Sophie Bennett, armed assault. The judge called it one of the most disturbing cases of obsessive control she'd ever seen. You didn't love Catherine Hayes, the judge said at sentencing. You owned her, and when you couldn't control her anymore, you destroyed her. You don't deserve mercy, and you won't receive it from this court. Thomas showed no emotion as he was led away in chains. They say heroes are born, not made. But Ethan's story proves something different. Sometimes heroes are just kids who've survived so much pain that they refuse to let anyone else suffer. Sometimes family isn't who you're born to, it's who shows up when everything falls apart. The silver sedan was crushed in a junkyard. Thomas Hayes was serving life without parole. Catherine's grave had fresh flowers every week, brought by the son she'd protected and the man she'd loved. And behind the Steel Riders clubhouse, where a homeless boy once slept in the shadows, there was now just empty space. Because Ethan wasn't invisible anymore. He was seen. He was loved. He was home. 6 months after the shooting, Marcus stood in the Steel Riders clubhouse with his arm around his son's shoulders. The entire club had gathered for a special ceremony. Ethan Hayes, the club president said, his voice carrying across the room. You took 3 bullets for one of ours. You protected this family with your life before you even knew you were part of it. Blood doesn't make you family. Loyalty does. Courage does. Love does. He held out a leather vest, the Steel Riders patch prominent on the back. This club would be honored if you'd wear our colors. Ethan's hands trembled as he took the vest. For 15 years, he'd been nobody. For 3 months, he'd watched this brotherhood from the shadows, longing for something he thought he could never have. Now he was one of them. Marcus helped him put on the vest, his own eyes wet with tears. Sophie cheered from the front row, jumping up and down with excitement. The club erupted in applause. Grown men in leather and denim, hardened by life and violence, celebrating a 16-year-old kid who'd proven that family was worth dying for. "Welcome home, brother," Bull said, pulling Ethan into a crushing hug. One by one, the members came forward. Each handshake, each hug, each welcome home was a promise. You're not alone anymore. You never will be again. That night, Ethan sat on the back porch of Marcus's house, his house now, with Sophie curled up beside him. She'd fallen asleep with her head on his shoulder, her small hand holding his. Marcus came out and sat on the other side, handing Ethan a soda. "You okay?" Marcus asked. Ethan looked out at the yard, at the motorcycle parked in the driveway, at the home he'd never thought he'd have. He thought about the cardboard boxes behind the dumpster, the empty stomach, the cold nights, the years of wondering if anyone would ever want him. "Yeah," Ethan said, and meant it. "I'm home." Marcus nodded, understanding everything Ethan couldn't say. "You were always supposed to be here, son. It just took us a while to find each other." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over Millbrook. A father, a son, and a little girl who'd brought them together. A family that had been broken and scattered and lost, now whole again. If this story moved you, if you believe in second chances and the power of showing up for people who need you most, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us what family means to you. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that it's never too late to find where you belong. Because Ethan's journey shows us that sometimes the family we choose is the one that saves us. And sometimes the invisible become the most important people in our lives.